at Southwestern Advantage, our average age is between 18 and 25.
Mm.
And, psychologically, that is where most people make their decision of what they believe, work ethic, whether the world owes them something. They psychologically form a lot of things during that time. So I have a lot of conversations about faith with folks. You talk about faith a lot. It's interesting when people lose faith. What is your thought currently of where someone would stop going to church or lose faith?
So the phrase stop going to church is an interesting phrase, right? So you have to define the word church. Some define the word church as those who are followers of Christ or of God or a certain faith tradition. And some would call that attending a service on a Sunday. So those are two different phrases that are often used interchangeably. So we'd have to kind of define that. And I think that's relevant to my next response, which is I'm having lots of those conversations too. I think Barna put out a stat recently that said a third of the people who previously were attending services on a Sunday at an organized church will no longer do so post-pandemic. Or at least that's the feedback. People are like, I didn't go and I didn't get struck by lightning. Turns out I think God still loves me and I don't have to show up at a service on a Sunday. And we're in the South, so that's even a little bit more of a predominant tradition or ritual that's baked into some of the ways of being down in the South for those who are people of faith. So I think all those things are interesting as you frame up this idea.
They're people of faith or their identity is to be a people of faith?
Well, it's a great delineation as well, right? So both.
Yeah.
So people who attend church services tend to fit both categories. So when I interact with people who are like, hey, I stopped going, I haven't gone back yet, and I'm not sure where I'm going. It's usually around, some of it's the political piece, because some churches have taken hard political stances. So there's that. I've heard from quite a few people too that go, I actually just don't want to do the political thing. I'm bombarded with it all the time. Is there an organized group of people called the church that gather together that actually avoid the political thing? Because I just want a reprieve. But if so, how? How do you navigate that thing? So this is a really interesting era for groups of people who have organized as the church. There's a lot of deconstruction going on, especially with Zoomers and millennials who are saying, I'm not sure I see the world the way my parents did. To me, the advent of the internet and the ability to access information dramatically shifted everything. When you and I were children, we had a pastor, a local pastor. Maybe there was a guy on television, maybe we listened to, and maybe like an evangelist came through town. So maybe over the course of a childhood, you'd have 2, 3 spiritual voices. But as a kid, even as an adolescent, maybe you read your first Oswald Chambers, or there weren't many spiritual voices.
That's a great point.
And they tended to come all through the same vein because they were being curated by your local church. So they just reinforced one point of view.
Yeah.
Up until, 20, 30 years ago, that was just the common experience in America. And if you really wanted to get crazy, you went to the library and tried to find some book on something, right? I mean, there was no such thing as an internet.
Which I'm sure all the 12-year-old kids did.
Yeah, which they didn't, right? So your faith was very, very curated by probably your parents, maybe a grandparent, and your local church. Highly curated, all very similar. Today's world, you're hearing, if you're 12, 14, 16, 18, you're hearing 20 different voices on a given week with all kinds of different perspectives.
That contrast each other.
And they completely contradict.
Yeah.
So, and I think this is one of the superpowers of these younger generations is synchronicity. They're able to take disparate thoughts, quantum physics and psychology and neurobiology and Christianity and Hinduism, like, oh yeah, that fits there. And like, they're putting it together going, well, I think there's a lot of this the same languaging. And some of that's quite beautiful. Where I'm finding people at a crisis is when they go, I've lost my faith in the system. The faith system that now no longer makes sense.
That's right.
And most of that system was built around an angry God.
Judgmental.
Very judgmental. An image that's way more like Zeus than a God who's holding all things together, right?
Yeah, like the Old Testament.
Yeah, he's just this God out there. Yeah. If God's this angry, how is he love itself? These two things don't seem to. I now have in real time, I can Google any thought. Well, there's this theory of Christianity. There's this theory in Hinduism. There's this theory in Islam.
Is it a term now, universalism?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, which it's been around for a long time, but that's that synchronicity, or some people would say pluralism. Yeah. Especially if you're fundamentalist, you would be very concerned. This is a pluralistic way of looking at the world. I like synchronistic because I actually think there's a benefit to it. If you got a lot of fear, you'd call it probably pluralism. If you can see the benefit, and I said there certainly are pros and cons to the whole thing, right? And most of us, our way of being this comes from psychology, is most of us tend to swing the pendulum. If we were super fundamentalist conservatives, we tend to swing the pendulum all the way over here, like, screw all that, I'm going to be wide open. Mm-hmm. And then it starts to come back. Well, that didn't work either because it's just another form of fundamentalism. Mm-hmm. And things start to swing back. And life is really about trying to let that thing finally...
I'm going to be atheist.
Most atheists, I'll just say to them, well, would you agree that there's something transcendent about life? And there's something that's otherworldly or mysterious that's hard to describe. And even most atheists will go, yeah, there's something else out there. Okay, well, let's work from there. Mm-hmm. So I would call that spiritual, whatever language you might use for it, but there's something actually beyond us. If you can work with that, we might have some interesting conversations about what I call spirituality, what you might call quantum theory or something else, the nature of reality. And what I discover is that a lot of times it's all different languaging, but we're talking about the same God. Mm-hmm. Or inside like religious systems, we're not talking about the same God at all.
Yes.
This God you're describing, I don't know him. Like, I've never experienced him. So that's what I'm experiencing in faith, is there's this real deconstruction.
What I'm hearing you say throughout that is, if it was your parents, if it was a pastor, people putting their faith in people seems to be at the root of a lot of the problem.
When we're young, an authority figure represents God to us.
Right.
So that person is a representative of God until we grow older and we recognize our own agency and we're now responsible for ourselves in the world. And so it's not unusual to go through some deconstruction of some sort anyway. But now what to me is really interesting and I think really fun is that there is this kind of reformation of what does it mean to be a follower of God. And you get lots of voices that get to speak into it. And if you lead with fear and you go, there's this one specific dogma and that there's only one way that's right, I'm sure that would be really hard for you because you'd see that as the risk of heresy. But if you don't believe that it's about dogma, but you believe it's about a relationship with God, those are two different things. Mm-hmm. So it's not a belief in a belief. It's a trust in a person. Those have different energies. If it's trust in a person, God in personhood is always in this invitational place of going, hey, you're a child, you're my child of God. Our old religious languaging was imago Dei. Mm-hmm. You're a reflection of the divine. So there is something in you. You're a light of the world. Now, interestingly, again, scientifically, energetically, we're 99.99 to the 15th power or something. We're an exchange of energy. So suddenly it's not just metaphorical. Mm-hmm. We actually are lights in the world. That's the other advantage we have now is we're able to use sciences and other things to kind of come alongside this psychology and go, oh, wait, I actually can read the Bible through a different lens now because of the benefit of what I have, what the internet has given us.
Which is the only way to understand truth. I recently had someone I respect say, I just don't know what's true anymore.
Maybe what they're saying is, I don't know what to believe anymore. Because what you could say to them is, to the best of your ability, tell me what you know is true. Tell me what is true. When you look at your child sleeping at night, describe that. Mm-hmm. Peace, serenity, joy, gratitude. Tell me about those. Get them moving that direction and then say, did that come from you? Is that fully from you? Or do you think that's connected to something else? Well, I think maybe that's somehow it comes in me when I'm aligned in this thing, or maybe when I'm in this space. Oh, so you have to kind of be aligned with the thing. What's the thing? Could we, just for the conversation, could we use a working title? God? Yeah. Okay. When I'm aligned with God, I have a different sense of gratitude and peace and serenity. And I'll describe some of what's happening in you when you do that. Well, peace, love, joy, long-suffering, goodness. Yeah. Oh, so that's what's true? Yeah. So that's what it means to be in relationship with God? Notice we didn't go to dogma. What's true is what's deeply relational, and most people actually are more tuned into it than they know. What I think people are pushing against is the pressure they feel from religious systems to conform to one system of dogma. And it's hard to get around this. I don't have any answers. I grew up, my dad was a pastor. I've been in the church my whole life. So I don't have an answer to this. Go all the way back to the Old Testament when the Israelites were saying, yeah, but we want a king. And God's going, well, you got me. Nah, we want a king. Mm-hmm. Well, what do we do with the king? We glorify them and then we crucify them. Take whatever king it is. We love to say they're our greatest hero, and as soon as they do the thing we didn't like, we love to crucify them. Yep. That's what we love to do with people. Because what are we doing? We don't actually want to take ownership for our lives. We want that person to take ownership for our lives.
Yep.
So oftentimes spiritual leaders are making a codependent psychological deal with their congregation. I'll be your king, and you can trust me, and you don't have to do the work with you and God. That's the unfortunate part of the system, was when you keep trying to put one person in a thing, and this isn't just the church, it's in any organization, that person is going to fail. Like this is true about a CEO, right? But in a spiritual thing, it's like, well, not only are you responsible for the organization, but you're also responsible for my spiritual well-being.
Yeah.
That adds a whole nother layer.
It does.
And at one level, you're kind of set up for failure. And I think the church has a chance to reinvent itself organizationally.